Hello and welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about some tournament options for you here on tonight's huge Friday MLB slate and a lot of pitching options. So there's not, I don't think, any one pitcher necessarily that's a huge, obvious top pick. There's plenty of guys that are good top options, which means you can get some guys in great spots at pretty low ownership. Looking over at both sides here, I think one guy's going to be very low owned that does have big upside is Jose Fernandez. He's $11,800 on DraftKings, $10,800 on FanDuel. Facing off against a Washington offense that's been very hot recently. Also opposing Max Scherzer. I don't think either one of those players will have huge ownership because they are facing off against each other. But I certainly think that Jose Fernandez provides you with a lot of upside. So he's one of my favorite GPP options. Guys like Madison Bumgarner and Zach Greinke, not to say I'm not playing them in GPPs, but those are my cash game pitchers. I think they got great floors. I think I prefer Bumgarner's upside a little bit to Greinke's, so I slightly prefer him in GPPs, especially on DraftKings, where Bumgarner comes in $800 cheaper. On FanDuel, he's $600 more expensive. So if you like Bumgarner more, DraftKings is the place to get your exposure there. A couple other guys who have interesting, different salaries. Drew Smyly, $7,700 on FanDuel, $94 on DraftKings. Not a guy that I love the floor on necessarily, but he's a guy that I know has huge upside. He showed it against this same team 3 starts ago, and that was at Baltimore. Now he's at Tropicana. Nice park shift for him there, so he's another great option. I like Justin Verlander as an option. He's a guy that's facing off against a Kansas City team that rocked Corey Kluber last night, but Kluber hadn't pitched in almost 3 weeks, so I'm not saying that it wasn't surprising for him to get hit as hard as he did, because it certainly was, but definitely a guy that Verlander has shown some upside too. He had a couple decent starts against this same team, and although it's obviously meaningless now for Detroit, he's a guy that I'll be targeting just a little bit. And then if you look at DraftKings prices, one guy that really stands out price-wise is Johnny Cueto. I know he's been awful recently. In fact, his last 5 starts, he has negatives on 3 of them, and no more than 9.9 in any of those games. But if you look right before that, 2 starts before that, complete game 4 hitter against the same Tigers team. This is an offense that continues to struggle, and Johnny Cueto at $7,700 I think is an incredible steal tonight on DraftKings. FanDuel price over $10K, not a guy that I'm targeting a whole lot there, but at that really cheap price tag on DraftKings, certainly a guy that I'll have some exposure to. And then outside of that, at starting pitcher, really nobody else that stands out as a great play as far as cheap guys go. I mean, you can consider some guys down there, but really nobody that stands out. I mean, Brandon Finnegan's a guy who has some upside, but he also isn't going to be pitching a ton. You're imagining 75, 80 pitches, probably tops right around there. So not a guy that I'll be looking at. And outside of that, I mean, Ian Kennedy would be a guy you'd be looking at, but he's pitching at Coors Field, so no thanks for me there. Not touching either side of the Boston-Toronto game either. Both sides of the Mets, Yankees are interesting. Steven Matz against the Yankees and Tanaka against the Mets. I don't love either guy, but if you get a nice discount on one of them, I don't mind targeting them in a couple tournaments. Catcher options, I love Buster Posey, despite being a righty against Ruby De La Rosa, who is much better against righties than he is against lefties, but obviously, being at home, you expect that they will get to him because there are some decent left-handed batters here in this lineup that we'll get to here in a couple minutes. I like Russell Martin against Rick Porcello at $4,100, coming off of his big game 2 days ago. 2 hits, a double, homer, 4 RBIs. Got to like that. Other guys to consider here, Travis d'Arnaud against Tanaka, just because he does have that upside, and Tanaka has been fine, but we've seen d'Arnaud hit very well, especially at home, so that's a good spot. Sal Perez is your BVP guy against Justin Verlander. He continues to hit him well, so I'm looking at him as a guy with some pop. Wellington Castillo hits lefties very well. Facing off against Madison Bumgarner, you're certainly not targeting Bumgarner, especially at AT&T, but this is a spot where you can find yourself with some very, very low ownership. I mean, obviously Bumgarner just as capable of anyone else to giving up one bad pitch, and Wellington Castillo can certainly make him pay for that. But this is obviously the GPP podcast, so you want to find the guys that are under-owned that have potential. Obviously, a guy like Wellington Castillo is not a guy you'd be playing in multiple lineups, but single bullet type of guy. Same goes for a guy like Josh Phegley. We know he has big-time upside. He's cheap especially on DraftKings, and he's facing Mike Fiers, who gives up a ton of hard contact. So I like that quite a bit too. Max Scherzer has had some issues with the long ball. JT Realmuto has shown some power, so that's one more guy that I'll throw in there as an upside play there. First base options, hard to look past Edwin Encarnacion, right around 5K on both sites. You love him. David Ortiz continues to hit the ball very well. Homered again in his last game, up to 35 on the season. The ageless wonder that is David Ortiz just continues to mash the ball. Gotta like him. Joey Votto, another interesting option at Milwaukee against Davies. And then as you're scrolling down a little bit more, you're looking for guys that no one's going to be on. For instance, Adrian Gonzalez at $4,300. Facing off against Jeff Locke. Jeff Locke's had some big struggles with lefties, and Gonzalez has actually hit lefties pretty well this season. Another one of those guys people avoid instantly in lefty-lefty matchups, but he's hit lefties well. Same goes for Chris Davis, has hit lefties well. Obviously, he's going to have higher ownership than a guy like Adrian Gonzalez, despite a matchup against Drew Smyly, who has pitched well. Miguel Cabrera, if you're not a believer in Cueto turning it around, Miguel Cabrera is very cheap. He's $3,800 on FanDuel, $41 on DraftKings. Has been awful recently. I mean, barely above terrible, but this is certainly a guy we know, still one of the best hitters in baseball when he's completely healthy and gets it going, and definitely a guy that I'll be getting some exposure to in GPPs at that cheap price tag. Brandon Belt, I love tonight against De La Rosa. Don't imagine he'll be very low owned, but there's so many first base options that I don't think anyone's going to have enormous ownership. And obviously with a game in Coors Field, those guys will take on some bigger ownership there as well. And speaking of those guys, Justin Morneau, $3,300 on DraftKings, $38 on FanDuel. That's the guy I'll be targeting quite a bit tonight to get myself some cheap Coors Field exposure with some big upside. Second base option, speaking of upside, Dustin Pedroia has shown a ton of it recently. He's had three of his last 4 games, he's had monster outings. He's got, in his last 4 outings, 9 hits, 3 of them homers, 2 of them doubles, 8 RBI. Gotta love him tonight. Same goes for Brian Dozier also, and Jose Altuve. Altuve is really cheap on FanDuel, facing a lefty, and Felix Doubront, who is a fringe major leaguer at this point, struggles big time with righties. That's a guy I'm looking at quite a bit. Yangervis Solarte is another guy that I'm targeting here. He's got first base and third base eligibility on DraftKings, third base only on FanDuel. This is a guy that hits the ball well, facing off against Chad Bettis, so I like him a great deal as well. Other guys at second base, Ben Zobrist's been better from the left side of the plate. I'm looking at him as well. Robbie Cano against Giovanni Gallardo has not been great recently. And then going down, you can look at a guy like Odubel Herrera, who is outfield eligible on FanDuel, but second base and outfield on DraftKings. And then the last one, another Coors Field bat, Jed Jerko. Nice and cheap on both sides. We know he's got big-time upside. Got some power there, so I like him. Third base options, Nolan Arenado's got to be my favorite. $4,800 on both sites. The guy's got massive, massive upside. Get him at a little bit of a discount from Josh Donaldson, who, especially with a Coors Field game, he's also in play. He's going to see some lower ownership because of that. Miguel Sano gets another lefty. Going back to the well with him once again. Other options, Adrian Beltre, really fair price tag against the lefty at home. The Texas offense really starting to kick it into high gear recently, so I like that quite a bit. Other options, you can look at Machado against Smyly, but like I mentioned, I do like Smyly tonight. Not trying to play a ton of Baltimore bats, but certainly have to consider some of these guys here. Other third base options for you as you scroll down, Justin Turner, who I mentioned at second. Same goes for Jed Jerko. Both those guys have eligibility on DraftKings. Freddie Galvis, third base and shortstop on DraftKings. Shortstop only on FanDuel, but he's got big upside, and he's a lefty against Williams Perez. So in case you didn't know, Williams Perez, awful against lefties. 385 WOBA allowed. So the switch hitting Freddie Galvis certainly going to be in a good spot for you there. And then Marwin Gonzalez, as you know, my cheap play. Could also get Cody Ash on DraftKings at third base for $2,900. Another lefty in that good matchup there. Shortstop, not a whole lot to see, but I do like Carlos Correa quite a bit once again against lefty and Doubront, especially at his FanDuel price. You got to love that. Jose Reyes against Ian Kennedy. Kennedy has pitched well, but now it's Coors Field. Whole new monster there. I like him. I'm not playing Francisco Lindor against Chris Sale. You can throw him in a tournament if you want, but obviously that's what this podcast is for here. And you got to think Chris Sale, last performance against this team, struggled a little bit, but most of that due to a guy who we'll get to in a minute as a GPP play. But other options, Xander Bogaerts, fairly priced across both sites. I think he's an option as well. Corey Seager, a guy that's been hitting the ball very, very well since he came up. I like him. And then my favorite play, if he's back in the lineup, it's possible that he is. We don't know for sure. Brandon Crawford, near minimum salary on FanDuel, lefty against De La Rosa at home. Absolutely love that as a nice punt play. Outfield options. Not every day that you see Will Myers as the most expensive hitter, but he's been good since he returned from the DL here. $5,600 on DraftKings, much cheaper on FanDuel. Obviously, you're looking at these guys, the Coors Field guys. I prefer the San Diego side of this one because Chad Bettis, much worse pitcher than Ian Kennedy. But Ian Kennedy, 1.72 home runs per 9 this year. Both sides of this one in play. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you stack it. See whoever you can get, find your values. Guys like Morneau will help you get that. Mike Trout, have to mention him right now. $3,800 on FanDuel, $49 on DraftKings. $38 is the crazy cheap price coming off a guy night where he hit 2 home runs and drove in 5. Also walked 3 times. A 42-point performance on DraftKings. 18.5 on FanDuel. That price is absolutely baffling to me on FanDuel. His ownership is likely going to be through the roof, and rightfully so tonight. Ryan Braun gets a lefty at home. Jose Bautista gets Rick Porcello at home. You got to like both those. I'm really not playing Bryce Harper against Jose Fernandez. I'm a big Fernandez fan. You can consider him, but if I'm paying that type of price, I'm going to be getting one of these guys in Coors Field more than likely. Franklin Gutierrez, if he's in, more pricey than you'd like, but all this guy's done is just absolutely destroy the ball. So looking for some low ownership with some big upside, Gutierrez is a great way to go there. Other options in the outfield, I like Adam Eaton. The guy's got speed. He's got a little bit of power. And facing off against Cody Anderson in that pretty sizable ballpark there. I like him. Adam Jones and Steve Pearce, of course, in play against Smiley because he's a lefty. But like I said, don't love those guys. Chris Davis, baby crush. He's got a decent price tag. Been hitting a ton of home runs recently, so I like him at home. Curtis Granderson is an interesting tournament option against Tanaka. Same goes for his teammate Yoenis Cespedes. As we scroll down more, Mark Trumbo, another guy to chase a home run in Texas. Seen a ton of runs scored there recently. Would not be surprised to see that once again. Cole Calhoun has been pretty terrible recently, but he's got a cheap price tag facing Mike Pelfrey, who has had some struggles here. And then a couple other Boston bats here. Jackie Bradley Jr., Mookie Betts. Looking at those guys. I love Chris Young tonight, my favorite platoon player. $2,400 against the lefty of Matson. Yes, Matz has pitched well. Not going out of my way to pick on him, but certainly a guy that you can throw into your GPP lineups. I don't think he's a bad cash game play at all at that price either. Maybe a guy that helps you fit some big bats that you really want to get in there. And then scrolling all the way down, there's not a whole lot to see out here as far as cheap guys. Adrianza, if he's in the lineup for Brandon Crawford, I'll be looking at him at $2,000 flat minimum against Ruby De La Rosa. I think he's a fine option. And outside of that, really nothing that's standing out as far as 2K guys. But one guy that I will mention here, Ryan Rayburn, $2,100 against Chris Sale. Last time he faced him, he did take him deep twice. So obviously you're not chasing that, but he's had some success against Chris Sale throughout his career. Near minimum salary, maybe throw him in the lineup or two. If you got any questions, you can find me on Twitter at BigItaly42. We are at DF Cafe. Lots of great content for all sports going on right now at dailyfantasycafe.com.